All right, so when I started this channel, I didn't think I would be doing so much controversial material, but unfortunately, these are the times that we're in. So trigger warning. If you are, as Chris Rock said in one of his specials, a smarty art ninja and are very defensive about being intellectual and intellectualism and everybody should be as smart as you, I may say something in this video to offend you. And on the flip side of that, if you are, as Chris Rock said, and I think that same special, a person that books is kryptonite to a ninja like yourself, I may say something to offend you as well. I don't know what I'm going to say exactly when I get ready to record these videos, and I do these trigger warnings before I start the video because I understand where I want to go, but I don't know exactly how it's going to come out. So I gave my trigger warning. If you're on either side of the fence of this strongly, this intellectuals versus quote unquote regular people, I guess, by way of Joe Budden and the JBP versus Angela Rye and the Native podcast, let's not be in our feelings. Let's listen and discuss in the comments civilly. Let's not get emotional about this. Nobody's being attacked. I'm not trying to attack anyone. Let's get into it. Now, before we start, if you rock with the channel, hit that like button if you haven't hit that like button yet, and hit that hype button if you're on mobile. Swipe left on the comments, hit that hype button. All right, let's get right into it. All the thoughts and viewpoints expressed on this channel are the opinion of Professor Lex, the proprietor of the channel, and for entertainment purposes only. And with that being said, I guess I should start this by saying, to quote Dave Chappelle, apparently,
they should have never gave you niggas
books. They should have never gave you ninjas books. Now, of course, I'm joking. But this Joe Budden podcast versus the Angela Rye and Native Land podcast, going through the situation and hearing everything and seeing both sides of it. Now, I'm not going to play any clips from either side because I saw that they were kind of striking videos about playing clips from these podcasts about this situation. And so it's kind of contentious from both sides, understandably so, but I think it's a little bit of an overreaction. But it made me think about the lessons from the Tpab Butterfly album by Kendrick Lamar. Now, loosely, the album is about Kendrick's dealing with the success of becoming a star rap artist. Now, this could relate to becoming successful in any form of fashion, in my opinion, in the public eye, especially in the United States, coming from an African-American background, under a system of oppression, history of slavery. We all know the history of the country. So the records that came to mind first were Institutionalized and You, in a way, but definitely the section of the album that I think starts with Hood Politics, How Much a Dollar Costs, Black of the Berry, that section of the album. All of those, I think, songs and lessons apply in this situation in various ways, but in one main way, and that is us dealing with the stereotypes that come with the upbringing that we are attached to, whether we are from that upbringing or not, and how that leads to a lot of self-hate and infighting amongst each other in many different ways. Now, a little background on the conflict, so to speak, or the disagreement, I should say. What happened was Marc Lamont Hill, who is a professor, in my opinion, freedom fighter, scholar, so many things, right? Commentator, political commentator mostly, is on the Joe Budden podcast. If you don't watch the Joe Budden podcast, it is the #1 quote unquote urban hip hop podcast out there, right? One of the top podcasts in the United States for sure. And it is independently owned. That is going to be relevant later in my conversation. But for the most part, Joe Budden and them have a regular entertaining podcast where they cover a wide variety of topics. They pretty much go through the trending topics of the day and the week. And it's still based mostly though in hip hop culture, right? Now, the Native Land podcast is mostly a political podcast that is left leaning. It's headed by Angela Rye, Tiffany Cross, Bakari Sellers, Andrew Gilliam, all political people. I think Andrew Gilliam was mayor at one point all political pundits who appear a lot on CNN and etc. Very intelligent people on both sides. Shout out Flip, shout out Ice, Ish, Parks, Mona, and everybody at the JBP as well. Imani, all of them. Now, with so many different personalities on the JBP, they get into disagreements and arguments. Marc Lamont Hill and queenzflip, if you know queenzflip from queenzflip YouTube channel, the pranks and all that kind of stuff. More of a comedic background, right? queenzflip, and a history in battle rap as well. He and Marc had a clash over how they go about not only promoting the podcast, but how they interact with each other during the podcast, and I guess the characters and roles that they fit into. But again, it's just a normal argument. It happens when you get a bunch of brothers together, you get a bunch of men together. These arguments, they asked each other to step outside. Nothing ever happened. Nothing really came of it. They calmed it down, talked like men. Should have been water under the bridge, right? Well, the intellectuals didn't think so because they are friends with Marc Lamont Hill over there at the Native Land podcast. Now, I think Tiffany Cross was the person who brought it up and had the biggest issue with the situation. But there's a lot of moving pieces at play because they're under iHeartMedia, I believe. I'm not sure if Charlamagne's Black Effect or whatever the podcast deal he has with iHeartMedia, this podcast is under. But Charlamagne and Joe Budden have had a long-standing rivalry about business and about the podcast business specifically, right? So there are undertones of that in this disagreement and them throwing shots at the Joe Budden podcast because they kind of painted it as though the rest of the cast members on Joe Budden, which is the furthest thing from the truth, are picking on Marc Lamont Hill and kind of ostracizing him and because he's an intellect and they're not. And this is where the issue comes in because 2 or 3 of the members of the Native Pond podcast admitted that they don't even watch the Joe Budden podcast. So they cast a lot of judgments towards the podcast and towards the situation just because they feel like Marc Lamont Hill becoming upset in public is something he should not be allowed to do. This is my assessment of it, right? And this is where the To Pimp a Butterfly lessons come into play, in my estimation, because the angry Black person is a stereotype, right? And a lot of times what happens when you're in academia, I'm a person who's been to school the whole 9, right? I guess I could be seen as an academic. I don't consider myself that. But anyway, and I'm not a professor. I haven't taught anybody anything. That's my producer name. But anyway, what happens a lot of times is you run from what somebody else deems being seen as a nigger because niggers can't be smart. And you try to appear to be something else. And this happens to people, I think, a lot of times without them realizing it, is that you take on the characteristics of a racist or a prejudiced person by pigeonholing our people into being impossibly unhuman and not having any kind of emotion or honest response to any kind of conflict they may face, right? Or situation they may face. In the song Institutionalized, Kendrick is loosely talking about bringing his friends around the success of being a rapper, right? And them still having hood ways and not being used to having money and seeing things as licks and things like that because of their history of a lack of opportunity from where they come from. This, to me, is how the Native Land podcast kind of pigeonholed all of the Joe Budden podcasts into this kind of mindset, so to speak, right? And it's something that, in my opinion, once we have success, it's something that we do a lot, is we start to not only question if the people who come from the background we come from can handle success, but if we didn't come from that background and we think they came from the background, we question not only their intelligence, but whether they are or can be civil in any kind of way. Now, in some cases, some of our people they can't change, right? But this is more about the judgment and not about those cases, what I'm talking about here. Because throughout the album, Kendrick is explaining this kind of fight, so to speak, right? And it's layered because he's explaining his own situation, his own conflict with himself, but he's also using that to also broaden the conversation to the conflicts that we have in our community as a whole. And when you get to hood politics and how much a dollar costs and complexion and the blacker the berry, it is more about the discussion of the infighting and the self-conflict, which in my opinion starts from within with the individuals and then comes out in us lashing out at each other, right? That is mostly pointed in the Black of the Berry lyrics. I'm not gonna go through any lyrics and all that because I would have to do each song. I may do videos for each song down the line for sure. But that all culminates in my opinion, where, you know, that's the NEGUS part where he's talking about us being niggas and where the word comes from and us having just more self-confidence in each other and more understanding with each other, which you would think with having the link of being oppressed by a system, it would be easy, but because of, and the album does a great job of explaining this all the way through, because of the many pressures that you face from your past, it becomes difficult because it becomes kind of crabs in the barrel. This is the definition of crabs in the barrel, so to speak, in my opinion. This whole situation is because to judge a situation and to put somebody you know personally, and because they are like or are into what you are into above other people that you admittedly didn't know anything about or don't know much about, sounds like the ideology of a racist or prejudiced person. You know, when Kendrick says at the end of Black of the Berry, gang banging make me kill a ninja blacker than me, this is a form of gang banging in the same kind of way. It's more elitist, intellectual. There's two sides. There's the dumb side and there's the intellectual side, right? It's the same thing. And what has to happen is you have to become very careful of fighting against one thing and not realizing that you're fighting against yourself because you have become that same thing. You have become prejudiced towards other people. You hold the same ideology as the people you're so-called fighting against, but because you're using something as simple as skin complexion as opposed to a perceived intelligence level, because you have not engaged with these people you're seeing as dumb. You're taking a snapshot, which is what people do to us who are racist towards us. You're taking a snapshot situation and casting a judgment over these people's whole entire existence. That is crazy. But it's something that we have to admit is very prevalent throughout every culture and every walk of life. There's a human condition of picking sides that is programmed into people that, in my opinion, the Tpab Butterfly album challenges that mindset, not only within yourself, but what part of yourself you see in other people that you may be trying to hide because you're trying to appear as something else or garner the approval of another group of people that you see is better than yourself. Now, I know I just said a lot there, and I'm gonna try to put it in a better way, in that what I saw in this situation is that the Native Land podcast, mainly just Tiffany and Angela, saw somebody who they deem as their equal being a part of a podcast with people who they deem as less than them. That's how it came across. And that sounds like racism to me. And one of the key things about that kind of mindset, a prejudice mindset in general, is that it comes from insecurity of the individual who is casting the stereotypes and aspersion on the other individual. I know that they present confidence, and a lot of our folks here in America don't understand or they accept the fact that somebody is looking down upon them when really that's not the case. The case is that they're insecure about who and what they are. So, you know, misery loves company, and I'll just leave it at that. But I want to talk about a situation that happened during the civil rights movement here in Chicago, where I'm from, dealing with Martin Luther King Jr. when he visited and they were starting I want to get this right, the Chicago Freedom Movement. Okay, he was brought here by Al Rabi, or Rabi, I don't know how to pronounce that, who was a political activist here in Chicago, and they were trying to get this movement started, and they needed to unite the neighborhoods and the community first. And even at that time here in Chicago, we had a big crime and gangbanging problem, right? So he took Dr. King to the West Side. Dr. King went into the bars at the time, the taverns, juke joint, whatever they called them, and played pool with some of the gang members and gang leaders in order to garner their support for the movement, and also to get them and everyone else to realize that, look, we need each other. We are more alike than we are different, and us working together is how we get things done. And that goes across racial, color line, all the lines, right? Quit letting people draw lines in your mind, even though the brain does look like it has lines in it. But anyway, that's besides the point. That now, y'all know I'm silly and I'm a joke, but that's where this becomes a problem, is because the Native Land podcast, to me, appeared to be trying to be for the betterment of the general public, and especially African Americans in this country, in the political spectrum. The best way to do that is by uniting. As Kendrick Lamar said in his verse in Chains and Whips, gentlemen and gangsters connect, this agenda of mine. Now, Dr. King displayed that in real life, and of course we know got a lot of results in a short period of time. And in my opinion, I think that's what Marc Lamont Hill's presence on the Joe Budden podcast is a great example of that as well. So that's all I got on this subject, man. Let me know what y'all think in the comments below. Remember, if you haven't hit that like button yet, hit that like button. If you're on mobile, swipe left on the comments and hit that hype button for me. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Share this video. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Thank y'all for watching as always, and we out.